If you invest in real estate long enough, you're not going to be able to continue to get conventional loans. Here's why. When you get conventional loans on real estate, it eats up what's called your DTI, or your debt to income ratio. So a conventional loan, you buy a property, they check your personal credit, income, all that good stuff, and then they issue you the loan, and that loan gets tied to your name, and then it affects that debt to income ratio. So eventually, if you keep stacking properties under your name, you're going to have too much debt compared to the income that you make, and they're going to say you're not loanable anymore. So how do we get around that? You do that through getting loans through LLCs. Now, I am talking about back-end loans. For example, if we're flipping a house or we're doing the BRRRR method, on the front end, we're going to buy with hard money, we're going to buy with private money, we're going to use our HELOC, we're going to use cash, some form to get us to the closing table, get it renovated. But what I'm talking about today is the loans that we're going to refinance into either on the back end of a BRRRR, or initially, if we were just to buy a property using traditional financing, which is going to be around 20% down. So the two ways that I've done it is either one, a commercial loan, which is going to be done through a small local bank, or two, a DSCR loan. DSCR loan stands for debt service coverage ratio. Now let's break these two down. The majority of my investing career, I have used commercial loans through small local banks. Now, small local banks can use the DSCR coverage ratio, which I'll talk about here in a minute, because it's something they're pushing more now because of the economic climate, but also they can kind of do whatever they want, whenever they want. Commercial loans that small local banks keep in-house are also known as portfolio loans. And the reason they call them portfolio loans is because they keep the loans in their portfolio. So if you were to go get a conventional loan, as soon as that loan's executed, then the loan originator is going to go and sell that off to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. But at small local banks, they keep these loans in their portfolio. And so a lot of times I would go and I'll do a BRRRR deal and I'll refinance out on the back end. And maybe the deal's okay. You know, it's a break-even cash flow deal, or we're making 50 to $100. It's not killer in cash flow. Well, a small local bank a lot of times doesn't necessarily care if I'm hitting a certain cash flow number or debt service coverage ratio number, because they are going to look at my personal financials and they're going to be like, okay, Jaron makes a lot of money. He has no consumer debt. He has tons of assets for retirement, tons of liquidity. Like, even if he's not crushing it and hitting the ratio we want for the cash flow minus the expenses, it's okay because he can cover it. And so that's what investing has been like for the majority of my journey over the last 6 years. But recently, banks have started to tighten up a little bit more. So instead of them saying, you know what, it's not a huge cash flow property. We understand what Jaron was trying to do. He BRRRR'd it, was able to pull all his money out. He's just got a little bit of cash flow. If something goes wrong, he has a bad month, whatever, he can cover it because he has a bunch of income. Now they're going to, we want you to meet this certain debt service coverage ratio. Now, before I dive into it, on the other side of the coin, outside of small local banks who do commercial loans, you have lenders who only do debt service coverage ratio. So a lot of investors only work with those type of lenders. So it's not something foreign or something new. I just haven't had to work with specifically lenders who deal with debt coverage because I've had these small local banks in my corner that will do kind of whatever they want because I have a high income and I have assets to my name. So it's a very common thing in the real estate space, but I think it's important that you guys know, what are they looking for? So some benefits to debt service coverage ratio is they're not as heavily looking at your income, at your assets, or at your credit score. There's some DSCR lenders who will lend to you if you have like a 580 credit score, right? Where a lot of these small local banks, if they're not doing a debt coverage loan, then they're not going to lend to that. But these DSCR lenders are, so there's a lot of positives to it. Where it kind of gets annoying or hairy is when you have to hit the specific ratio that they're looking for. So what does that ratio look like? They're wanting you to take your net operating income, or your NOI, divide that by your total debt service, which is just going to be your mortgage, including principal and interest. And they want that ratio to be 1.2 or higher.
It's no secret that if you're going to be successful in real estate investing, you have to be able to fund your deals. Whether you're doing the BRRRR method or whether you're fixing and flipping properties for a profit, you got to be able to get to the closing table with money, and you got to have money to rehab the property. And so I personally use backflip capital when I need money to get to the closing table and to rehab my properties. I'm in the middle of a flip right now, and I partner with Backflip. It has been the smoothest process of all time. I literally went on their app. applied for the loan. You get pre-approved in less than 48 hours. You can lock in funding in just a few seconds with the touch of a button. Funding takes less than 2 weeks. Hello, that gives you an advantage when you're making offers on properties. And I can't say enough about partnering with Backflip Capital. They're great folks with a fantastic product that everybody listening to this should check out for the next time you go to do a BRRRR deal or fix and flip property. So here's what I want you to do. Go down to the show notes of this show. I've put a link for Backflip Capital in those notes. All you have to do is click the link so that you can download their app and get your next deal funded with Backflip. Hey guys, when you're just starting out as a real estate investor, finding deals is the most important thing you can do. But unfortunately, it can also be your biggest hurdle. And let me tell you, it gets even harder when your business grows and you don't have a lot of time to look for properties and evaluate deals like you did on the front end. That's why you need to work with New Western. New Western has properties ready for rehab on their marketplace today. That means you skip the hours of research, driving neighborhoods, or calling agents. And instead, you get to start with a ready-made property. You can rehab and flip it, or rehab it and BRRRR it and hold it as a rental. So why is New Western good at what they do? Well, they buy and sell a property every 13 minutes. They work exclusively with investors and value-add properties, and that's all they do. They're licensed agents, they have a network of lenders, and they'll help you grow your business. So if you're ready to jumpstart your next project, visit newwestern.com, join their marketplace, and access the largest private source of rehab properties in the nation.
So if you were to have a 1 ratio on the DSCR scale, that means you break even. A lot of these lenders want a minimum of at least 1.2. Some want higher. Obviously, the higher, the better. So how do we calculate this? So net operating income is going to be all the income you bring in minus all of your operating expenses. So we were going to pull in our rents, and then we're going to subtract maintenance, capital expenditures, vacancy, property management, taxes, insurance, all that's going to come out except for our debt, our mortgage. We're going to keep that separate. That's going to be our net operating income. Then we're going to take that number and we are going to divide it by whatever our total annual debt amount is. So your mortgage, including your principal and interest. So for example, if we had an NOI of $600,000, okay, all of our income minus our operating expenses, and then our total debt service was $500,000, that gives us a ratio of 1.2. So a lot of these DSCR lenders would say, okay, we'll lend to that. But let's say that my debt service is $500,000 and my total income was only going to be $500,000. So we take $500,000 divided by $500,000. What does that give us? 1. These DSCR lenders are going to say, no, we're not going to lend to that because you're breaking even every month on your cash flow. And so if you were to have a bad month, an extra expense come up, whatever the case may be, you can't cover it with cash flow because there is no cash flow. So what's the solution? Well, I ran into this particular issue with a house that I'm currently working on. We bought it for $105,000. We were all in at $150,000. Now it's worth $240,000-ish, call it, and rents are going to be about $1,700. Okay, so it was worth $240,000. You could, in theory, get 80% loan to value on that, and that would be what? $240,000 times 80%, that'd be $192, right? And so I could take $192, pay off my $150, and keep that $42 in my pocket. The problem is the income that I have coming in isn't even close to being able to cover that $192,000 note. So I said, okay, let's just take out a cash out refinance on this BRRRR deal for $150,000. So we're $240,000. I only need a loan of $150,000 to pay back all my expenses that I have in the deal. So I went to the bank and told them I wanted to do this, thinking it'd be no issue. I'm actually in this deal with a partner. Combined, we make well over 7 figures a year. Combined, we have assets probably over $8 million. We got liquidity, like not a threat, not a credit risk, nothing. But because they've tightened up, they looked and they said, your debt coverage ratio on this particular deal is 0.92. And they said, we want a minimum of at least 1.2 to do this deal. So I go back and say, guys, I've been doing these deals with you for a long time. I understand that this may be costing us a few bucks every month, but look at our income, look at our assets. Like, we're doing this to be able to get into this deal without having any capital in the deal, and then we'll raise rents later, and then we'll refi when rates are lower when our mortgage gets paid down. They're like, no, we're going to have to stick true to our guns because of the current economic climate. And she said, instead of doing 150 to hit the 1.2 ratio that we need for our debt coverage, we will refi you at 120. So I'm all in this deal at 150. The banks tell me they'll only refi at 120. So now I got to make a decision. Do I want to refi at the top dollar, which they'll do is 120? That means I'm going to have to leave 30 grand in the deal, 15 for me, 15 for the partner. Or do I say, I'm going to flip this property, make a huge profit and move on to the next one. And we decided the latter. We ended up putting 15 more grand in it to get it flip ready. I think we're all in like 165, 170. We're going to sell it. We're going to list it at 259, I believe. And so when I did the math the other day, we should have a gross profit of $52,000. We're both taking home 26 grand, and then we'll pay taxes on that and keep moving forward. But the lesson here is understand what your lenders are doing before you get into a deal. So I have not ran into this with my current small local banks, and it was something I wasn't prepared for. Now, when I've done debt coverage loans, then you know that's the game you have to play. Well, I didn't think I was going to have to play the game this time. So it's important to know the state of your lenders. That way you can make the right decision. So if I could have done this over knowing what I know now at the beginning of the deal, I would have, number one, tried to get the deal at a lower price, which I think I could have, and then I would have spent less on rehab. And we would have made sure we got pretty darn close to that debt coverage number of 1.2, so that we would have been around the $120,000 mark all in, so we could have recouped all of our money. And even if we couldn't recoup all of our money we had in the deal, how can we minimize it to where we only have $5,000 to $10,000 left in the deal instead of $30,000 in the deal? Now, there's some ways that you can get creative and try to get around this, and we didn't spend a lot of time doing it because we looked at the profit margin on the flip and said, you know what, let's just flip it and move on to the next one. But the local banks, like I mentioned earlier, can do what they want. So if you're working with a DSCR lender, that's all they do is debt coverage lending, you're going to have to hit those numbers. But a small local bank can get creative. And I talked to my buddy Gaston, who had run into this issue on a commercial property, and he went to a bank and said, look, I understand it doesn't meet your debt coverage number, but look at our financials. We're in a strong position. What if, to make you feel safe, because all the bank's trying to do with this debt coverage number is to feel confident that they're going to get their payments every month. And he said, to make you feel safe, what if we leave 1 year of payments to the mortgage in escrow? And so the bank was like, yeah, we'll do that. And so they went ahead and lent them, even though they didn't hit that debt coverage number. They said, if you'll leave the amount of money that you need for payments for year one in escrow so we can grab it, then we'll feel confident doing it. So there's so many different ways to negotiate around this. But the key here, the big lesson, the couple lessons that I learned is, number one, know what your lenders are doing before you get into the deal. But number two is make sure you're buying undervalued. I preach this all the time. There are guys who go out, they teach all these different ways to buy real estate. And a lot of them will be like, hey, if you can buy it with certain terms, just buy it for what it's worth or for more than what it's worth. It doesn't matter. You don't have any money in the deal and you got good terms. I always think that's a very scary place to be, because you have a couple bad months and you don't have a lot of capital in your hand, you're in trouble. But the way that I teach people to buy is to buy very undervalued. And so I bought this property at 105, knowing that on the back end it's going to be worth 240 to 250. And so although my number one strategy didn't work for this particular one, because I wasn't enlightened on what I needed to do from a debt standpoint and how much rehab and all that to put into it, it's okay because I still have leverage. I'm all into this property now at 165, knowing that it's worth 250. And so we're going to still walk away with a really good profit. But if we got greedy and didn't leave ourselves the margin on the buy, then we're in really big trouble. And we're going to have to leave a lot of money in this deal, which is then going to stifle our growth to be able to continue to scale, because if your capital is locked up, it's hard to continue to scale. So make sure when you go into these deals, you know exactly what those lenders are doing, how you can pivot, and which loans are going to be best for you depending on the properties that you're buying.